A lonely rancher found an Apache warrior girl caged at auction for $5 and gave her his heart and name. The wind in Mesita carried dust and old regrets. It scraped softly against shuttered windows and whispered down empty alleys like a song no one wanted to sing anymore. It was a town that had learned how to forget names, faces, sins. The sort of place where the sun always felt tired and the people more so. Wade Callahan came in just past dawn, the brim of his hat low, his horse walking slow like it too had seen too much of life. He didn't look like much, just another rancher with dust on his boots and silence his chest. But he moved with the quiet certainty of a man who never needed to be explained. He hadn't meant to stop long. Just salt, some feed, a bottle for nights that wouldn't sleep easy. He tied his horse outside the mercantile and walked with the loose gait of someone born in the saddle, hat pulled down to keep the sun from seeing his eyes. Then came the sound, not sharp like a gun or shrill like a scream, but low, guttural, a murmur rising from the crowd that had gathered near the saloon. Wade turned toward it only because he had nothing better to do. Curiosity was a weed in his soul, rare but stubborn. A wooden cage sat center stage, makeshift and crude, hammered together with boards that had seen other sins. Behind its slats sat a girl. No, a woman, but barely. Knees drawn up to her chest, dark hair matted to her shoulders. She did not cry. She did not cower. She only stared, eyes dark and sharp and far too quiet for her age. Lot 17, the man barked. Apache, feral, $5 to own what the army dragged in from the Black Hills. The crowd laughed. They whistled and jeered, tossed coins of the dirt like it was a game. One man shouted something Wade didn't catch, but it made the others roar with cruelty. She didn't flinch. She didn't speak. She just kept watching the horizon like she could will it closer. Wade didn't plan it. The word just fell from his mouth, low and even. 5. The auctioneer hesitated, laughed nervously, looked around for a real bid. But no one else spoke. The fun was over. The joke had lost its teeth. Sold. There wasn't applause. Just that wind again, brushing against the dry wood buildings like it knew how easily they'd all burn. The key was dropped into Wade's hand without a word. The man avoided his gaze. A few in the crowd shook their heads. Fools and widowers, they muttered. Can't fix a woman born for war. Wade opened the cage. She looked at him like a wolf might look at a river, uncertain if it meant life or death. She did not speak. She did not move until he turned his back and walked away. And then she followed. They rode without talk, the old horse creaking under the weight of two souls not yet trusting the earth beneath them. She sat behind him, her hands never touching, her body distant though they shared the same saddle. The hills rolled out before them, wide and brown, dotted with mesquite and thorn and the bones of cattle long gone. She didn't ask where they were going. He didn't offer. They rode until the town was a smear behind them, until the land grew quiet again. The ranch rose out of the land like it had always been there. Not large, not proud, just enough. A single-story house built by hand and heartache. Corrals in need of mending. Fence lines leaning like tired old men. A windmill spun half-hearted in the breeze. He helped her down, but she didn't take his hand. She stood tall, though the journey had clearly taken something from her. Dirt clung to her dress like memory. Her eyes stayed sharp, but her shoulders had begun to fold under weight unseen. There were no introductions. He gestured to the smaller room and left her there. No locks, no chains, just space. And silence. He cooked beans and bread, left a plate by her door. When he returned in the morning, the plate was clean. The days moved slow. She spoke little, but she worked, cleaned the troughs, brushed the horses with care that surprised him. One mare, mean to everyone else, let her braid its mane without so much as a snort. Wade watched from a distance, chewing on a stem of grass, pretending not to notice. She slept with a knife tucked into her boot. Wade never asked why. Some nights he caught her staring into the fire, like it might offer answers the world refused to give. Other nights she sat beneath the stars, whispering to Moon in a language he didn't understand. He never asked her to explain, and she never ran. Wade didn't know if she stayed because she felt safe or because she had nowhere else to go. But she stayed. That was enough. He built her a small corral near the barn, said it was for the chickens, though they had none. She nodded once, then spent the next morning fixing the broken boards with hands that knew how to break things but had chosen instead to build. One evening, he found a small bundle by his door, wrapped in cloth, simple and clean. Inside, a bone-carved pendant tied to a strand of leather. It looked like a hawk mid-flight. He stared at it for a long time, unsure what it meant, but certain it meant something. She never spoke of it. Neither did he. But the next night, when she sat by the fire, he offered her the chair instead of the floor. She took it, slowly, quietly, and for the first time, she let her eyes rest. Wade poured them both coffee, bitter and hot. They drank in silence, but it wasn't empty anymore. It had weight now, warmth. He didn't know her name yet, but something told him he would. And in the hush of that small house, once echoing with ghosts, now whispering with possibility, he felt the wind shift. Not much, but just enough. The days slipped by like water through an old tin pail, slow at first, then unnoticed. The girl never asked to stay, and Wade never asked her to leave. Their silence, once brittle and sharp, softened into something almost companionable, like two trees grown near enough to shelter each other without ever touching. She rose with the sun, before Wade did, her figure already a silhouette against the amber sky as he stepped onto the porch each morning. She moved without noise, her feet learning the land like she was remembering it, not discovering it. When she knelt beside the horses, they responded as if they'd known her all their lives. Wade watched her, always from a distance. Her name still lived somewhere behind her teeth, unspoken. He called her little bird in his mind, not out of condescension, but because she reminded him of something wild and winged that refused to break, even when caged. She never used the chair he left on the porch, never asked for things, never seemed to rest. The ranch, once little more than cracked earth and stubborn fences, began to feel different. It wasn't laughter that returned. It was breath, rhythm, movement. She didn't bring joy. She brought motion, and that was something. The second week, Wade caught her in the old root cellar, sorting through rusted tools and tangled twine. She was organizing, not looting, setting things right without being asked. He nodded once, as if to say thank you, but her eyes passed through him like smoke. That evening, he set a hammer and fresh nails on the work table by the barn. He didn't say why. She didn't ask. By morning, the south gate hung straighter than it ever had. They passed like that, him offering, her accepting, neither acknowledging the exchange. Not out of coldness, but reverence, the way one handles something that might vanish if named. Wade kept a journal. He never wrote in. Pages yellowed, corners curled, empty but for one entry from long ago, a name scratched out so violently the ink had bled through. He took it out once while she shelled corn in the kitchen, staring at the page as if the missing word might return if he stared long enough. "Tolly," that's what she said when he asked. She didn't say it until the 9th evening, seated across from him in the low firelight. The word came soft, folded in breath. He didn't repeat it, just nodded and tucked it away like a letter too sacred to open twice. When she spoke, it was only when necessary. Her voice had no tremble, but it carried weight, like someone who'd learned young that words were ration, not gifted. She told him little, only that she'd been taken from the north, her village burned, her father hanged in front of her before they sent her south as part of some peacekeeping gesture that had nothing to do with peace. Wade did not ask for more. He offered no pity, no gassed apology. Just poured her more coffee and let her story land like ashes on the floor between them. She seemed grateful for that. One morning, while he was repairing the pump, she returned from town. Alone, she walked the 7 miles there and back, barefoot. In her hands, a spool of thread, a tin of salve, and a book of matches. She didn't explain how she got them. He didn't ask. That night, he found her stitching the torn curtains in the front room, hands moving with the same care she gave to wounded colts. "Place is too quiet," he said aloud, half to her, half to the empty walls. She glanced at him, expression unreadable, and said, "It's not the place." He didn't reply, just stood a moment longer, then walked out into the dark. The next day, he cleared the old chicken coop. She watched him from the corral, arms crossed. He told her it could be hers if she wanted space for planting. Maybe. She didn't answer, but the following week, tiny sprouts began to break the dirt near the fence line. She had dreams. Sometimes he heard her through the wall, low cries, sometimes angry, sometimes broken, like voices trapped under river ice. Once, when he knocked gently on her door, the sound stopped. When she came to breakfast, there were new bruises on her arms, but no explanations. Wade knew better than to offer comfort before it was wanted. So he mended fences instead and let his presence speak louder than his mouth. The ranch began to hold a rhythm. Coffee before dawn, shared chores, meals in silence, a life shaped by small, kind repetitions. He fixed the porch step. She planted corn. He trimmed the wild grass near the barn. She cleaned the saddle leather. No thank yous were said. They were felt. He watched her sometimes, not in the way of a man wanting, but in the way of a man remembering, as if watching her reminded him of a version of himself long buried beneath duty and dust. She moved with a grace that belonged to the land, not to people. She never touched him, never asked to, but once, while leading the mare off of water, her fingers brushed his wrist by accident. A jolt passed between them, not electric, earthbound, heavy, old. She looked at him, startled. He didn't move, and then she walked away. That night, he couldn't sleep. There were still things he didn't know, like how long she meant to stay, or if staying meant forgiveness. Not just for her, but for him, for the silence he let live inside him for so long, for the blood on his hands that never quite washed out, no matter how many rains came and went. One evening, she left a bundle on his porch again. This time, it was a strip of woven cloth, red, black, and ochre. It looked like a piece of home. He ran his thumb along the threads for a long time before tucking it into his coat. He didn't wear it. Not yet, but he kept it near. As summer leaned into its own heat, the sky burned longer each day, stretching out gold and orange like it couldn't let go. The chickens came. 3 of them, from a trader she must have spoken to. He never saw the deal made, but they clucked in the coop one morning like they'd always been there. She smiled once, watching them peck. It was small, a flicker, a crack of sunlight through a boarded window. But he saw it, and something in him stirred. Not hunger, not desire, just the faintest echo of laughter buried deep. The house was still quiet, but it was no longer hollow. And in that silence, something was beginning to grow. The summer had ripened to its heaviest, the heat lying thick over the plains like a blanket too worn to be lifted. The corn in Tolly's little patch grew shoulder-high now, its stalks rustling the breeze like whispered confessions. Chickens pecked lazily at the dust near the coop. Even the wind had softened, moving through the house like it had finally learned to listen. Wade stood by the fence line, his hands wrapped around old cedar rails, eyes fixed on the slow shimmer of the distant hills. Tolly worked nearby, mending a feed sack with the same stillness she gave to every task, as if motion itself was her language. She hadn't spoken much that morning, but she didn't need to. Her silence no longer felt like distance. It felt like presence. They shared shade beneath the porch at midday. 2 cups of coffee, black as the soil after rain, sat between them. Flies buzzed near the door. Somewhere a hawk cried, unseen. Then came the sound of hooves. Not casual like a neighbor's visit. Not aimless like a rider passing through. Purposeful, heavy, carrying the rhythm of government and warning. Wade rose before she did, stepping down with a quiet that made his boots seem weightless. The rider came into view just past the ridge, a younger man in a gray coat, clean-shaven, back straight. Behind him, another, older, broader. The first wore a badge tucked discreetly at his belt. The second wore authority in the way he didn't need to speak. They dismounted without pleasantries. "You're Mr. Callahan," the first said. Wade nodded. Tolly had already stepped back into the shadow of the house. Not hiding, just watching, measuring. "We're from the agency." Got word you're harboring a federal ward. Apache extraction. Female. Acquired without proper chain of custody. Wade didn't move. His voice came low and even. She was sold like cattle. I paid the man who held her. That man wasn't authorized to sell government property. Tali's chin lifted at that. Her eyes burned, not wild, not scared, but insulted. Wade saw it. So did the rider, who cleared his throat and softened his tone. She was meant to be transported east. Integration and re-education. A program. There's paperwork. Wade stepped closer, just enough to make the rider blink. She's not paperwork. The older man finally spoke. I don't care what she is to you. She doesn't belong here. The words landed heavy. Wade didn't answer. Not then. Behind him, he could feel her eyes, sharp, alive, waiting not to be saved, but to be seen. The riders left with dust in their wake and promises to return. They'd given him 3 days. 3 to decide whether he'd give her up or watch his land get tied in legal knots he wouldn't be able to loosen. Inside, Tali sat at the edge of the hearth, legs tucked beneath her, hands still. She didn't ask what was said. She already knew. Her face was unreadable, but her shoulders had drawn in, just barely, a sign he'd learned to read like weather. You don't have to go, he said. She didn't look at him. I don't plan to. They were quiet after that, but the silence had changed. Later that evening, she came to him beneath the stars, not in fear, not even in need, just presence. She stood by the fence where he leaned, both of them watching the sky as it slipped from lavender to ink. My name, she said slowly, means near wind. He turned toward her. Tali is short for Talise. My mother named me for the breeze that stirred the trees the morning I was born. He nodded, as if memorizing something precious. They said I was wild, that I refused to listen, that I cannot be trained. You listen fine, he said. You just didn't bow. She looked at him then, really looked. Something in her face loosened, like a thread pulled from old cloth. I've never belonged anywhere. Even among my own, I asked too many questions. Then maybe you don't need to belong. Maybe you just need someone who won't let go when you don't. Her throat worked, but no sound came. The wind stirred between them like a breath held too long, then released. They sat on the porch for a long time, their shadows folding together beneath the lamplight. He told her then, not everything, but enough, about his brother lost to a border raid, about the blood he'd spilled believing it would earn peace, about the years spent building fences not just for cattle, but around himself. Tali didn't interrupt. When he was done, she placed her hand over his, light, certain, strong. You don't owe me protection, Wade. I know, and I'm not something to be kept. I know that, too. Then why are you willing to lose everything for me? Because you're not mine, he said, but you're here, and I will not let them take what chose to stay. She smiled then, slow, almost sad, like someone who hadn't been believed in for a long time. The next morning, she began gathering stones from the riverbed. He didn't ask why. She stacked them carefully along the back fence, building something. He wasn't sure what, but it wasn't defense. It looked like ceremony. He left her to it. The final night before the men were to return, she came into his room, not as a guest, not as a burden, but as someone choosing stillness over exile. She didn't touch him, just sat at the edge of the bed, their hands brushing once, breath rising in rhythm. If they come for me, she said, I won't run. Then neither will I. He meant it, and she believed him. There were no declarations, no kisses, just a shared silence that had learned, at last, how to speak. And in that quiet, deeper than words, something rooted. Not love, not yet, but the soil that could hold it. The beginning of something that could not be taken. The morning arrived pale and windless, as if even the sky was holding its breath. Wade stood beneath the old sycamore, hands buried in his coat pockets, watching the sun crawl slow over the ridge. The house behind him was still, no pots clanging, no boot steps across the porch, only the faint scent of coffee drifting through the open door. A quiet morning, but not an empty one. Tali moved like smoke between the bar and the garden, checking the hens, pouring water into the clay bowls she'd made herself. Her braid was tied tight today, the red thread woven through it bright against her dark hair. She hadn't said much, but the weight in the air told Wade everything he needed to know. They were coming back. 3 days had passed since the warning. Long days. Quiet ones, but not idle. He cleaned the ledger, sharpened the tools, stacked the kindling with a precision he didn't recognize in himself. Tolly had sewn a new curtain for the kitchen window and painted a line of soft ochre symbols across the chicken coop. Symbols he didn't ask about, but stood before once in the evening light, and felt moved all the same. The riders returned at noon. Dust rose behind them like a bad omen. For them again, same gray coats, same stern eyes, same sense of finality. The lead officer rode at the front, reins gripped too tight, jaw squared like a man trying to stay in control of a storm he didn't understand. Tolly stepped down from the porch before they could dismount. Wade stood beside her, silent, immovable. She wore a clean cotton dress and no shoes. No fear, either. The man spoke without dismounting. "We have orders. This land isn't recognized as sanctuary. That girl was taken from military custody and remains federal property under code. She's not property," Wade said, his voice quiet but sharper than any rifle. The man hesitated, eyes narrowing. "You're interfering with lawful transfer." Wade pulled a paper from inside his coat. Heavy parchment. Fresh ink. A signature still drying at the bottom. Marriage license. Filed and stamped in Mazida under Reverend Charles Price. "She's my wife now. Her name is Tolly Callahan." The man took the paper, scanned it, his lip curling as though the legality left a bitter taste in his mouth. "You married her for protection." "No," Wade said. "I married her because no one else ever saw her as whole. Because she is more than what was taken from her. Because she chose to stay." Tolly stepped forward then, lifting her chin slightly. "You're not here because of law. You're here because you don't understand how someone like me could belong to anything gentle." The officer opened his mouth, then closed it. Behind him, one of the younger riders shifted in his saddle, unsure. She continued. "You caged me, then called it order. Branded me a threat, then sold me like an animal. But I am not something you can reclaim. I am not lost." Her voice carried across the yard like wind through canyon stone, firm, calm, and echoing. The officer returned the paper to Wade with a flick of his fingers. "We'll be filing a report." "Then file it," Wade said. "But don't come back here." They turned their horses in silence. No final warning. No threat. Just dust and hooves and the sound of something breaking free. By sundown, they were gone. The evening settled gently, like a child finally asleep. Wade sat on the porch with a cup in his hands, watching the shadows shift across the hills. Inside, Tolly lit the fire and opened the windows to let the smoke breathe. The house smelled of cedar and soap and bread, just beginning to rise. She joined him, curling her legs beneath her in the chair beside his. Her braid was undone now, hair falling loose down her back. She wore his old flannel wrapped over her shoulders, the sleeves too long, the buttons misaligned. It fit her anyway. He looked at her hands, callous, healing, beautiful. Hands that had known how to hold weapons, and now knew how to hold a garden. She traced a line along the wood of the chair, not speaking, but the silence between them felt full. "Do you regret it?" she asked softly, eyes fixed on the dark beyond the trees. "No, even if it cost the land?" He shook his head. "The land's been quiet too long. I'd trade it all for the sound of someone choosing to stay." She turned toward him then, slowly, like a tree bending toward light. "You never asked me to love you. Didn't think it was something I could ask." She leaned her head against his shoulder, breath steady. "And if I do?" He closed his eyes. "Then that's the one thing in this world I'll never take for granted." They sat that way for a long time. The fire inside the house flickered across the windows, casting long shadows that reached across the porch floor. Somewhere, an owl called once, then vanished into silence. He would tell her, someday, about the boy he once was. About the war that taught him how to survive but not how to feel. About the guilt he carried like stones in his boots. But not tonight. Tonight belonged to something softer. He reached into his pocket and handed her a small bundle, a square of leather folded around something solid. She opened it carefully. Inside was the carved pendant she had once left him, Years ago it seemed now. He'd strung it on a new cord, wax and worn. I didn't want to wear it until I earned it, he said, until I knew what it meant. And now I want it close to my skin. She tied it around his neck with hands that didn't tremble. And you, he said, brushing her hair back gently, you kept my name. You didn't have to. I didn't keep it, she said. I claimed it. The wind picked up softly then, wrapping around the porch like a shawl. Inside, the fire snapped and whispered. Outside, the stars came out one by one, slow and deliberate, like they knew they were being watched. They did not kiss. They didn't need to. They just stayed. And in the hush between firelight and nightfall, between breath and belonging, between everything they had lost and everything they were still learning to build, there was peace. Not the kind written in treaties or ruled by governments, but the kind that grows slowly, quietly, the kind that no one, not even time, can take away. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe, give a thumbs up, and tap the bell so you never miss another tale from the old Wild West.